Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Toto Wolff has responded to Lewis Hamilton's claims of bias internally at Mercedes, favouring George Russell over the last few rounds. Hamilton made the claim after Monaco, certainly after qualifying, that he doesn't expect to beat Russell in qualifying this year, based on what he sees as internal situations that may be favouring Russell. Toto Wolff denies these claims, but does say that Hamilton is right to be sceptical. Also, rumours emerging though that Carlos Sainz is closing in on a new deal with Williams. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Let's get right into this discussion on Williams then, because interestingly enough, in this silly season period, some of the biggest players are Haas and Williams, which wouldn't necessarily be expected, but the way things are working, it actually makes a fair bit of sense. Williams apparently have huge performance upgrades coming over the next few rounds, and there is reason to believe they are on a solid trajectory as it stands. Carlos Sainz is in a tricky spot because Mercedes apparently were willing to offer him effectively a one-year deal, but now even they're not so sure on that, and they might say, you know what, we're just going to sign Antonelli instead, especially if someone else is at Williams, potentially Sainz, as we'll get into here in a second. Red Bull, for some reason, seem committed to Sergio Perez. I cannot help but think their commitment here to Perez is financially implied to some degree because, you know, he's just such a massive revenue driver for them in, you know, the Latin American, Mexican regions that it makes a lot of sense, I guess, for them to keep him on, even though you can very much argue they could, maybe should upgrade, but that's a topic for the day, I suppose, that Perez's extension gets confirmed. But that means that Sainz is not going to be going to Red Bull, it seems. He's almost certainly not going to be going to Mercedes. Aston isn't an option because Lance Stroll ain't going anywhere, so where do you go? It's either Audi or effectively it is Williams, and this is what Joe Soward says in his latest notebook, that apparently this is basically what is happening, and Williams actually makes a fair bit of sense. The feeling is in the paddock that Audi are not likely to be that competitive. Let me just make the colour correction a little more natural on that one. But the feeling is that Audi aren't going to be that good when they come in 2026. There's underlying politics, as he describes, that is never usually a good thing for a Formula 1 team. And this means that Sainz's most sensible choice might be Williams. Apparently, they will even pay the same as Audi, because this is one of the points that we believed Audi might be offering Sainz like a 3-year deal, or at least a 2+1 on mega money to get him into the team. And that's what effectively Helmut Marko said, that look, Audi are offering him a very lucrative contract that Red Bull cannot match, which may still be true, but apparently Williams can pay the same as what Audi can, so there's not really that advantage for the Audi move, and their car is a complete unknown that he could potentially join in the future, and Williams are going to have the Mercedes engine in 2026 that, according to sources, is probably the strongest package as it seems at the present day. So, you know, it adds to my idea that come 2026, it's going to be Ferrari versus McLaren. But, you know, we shall see if Mercedes can turn it around. But if the Mercedes package is the strongest power unit in 2026, as the sources are suggesting that it probably will be, that's also good for Williams. So maybe in the next 2 years, the Williams package is actually at least worth considering. And for Williams, a Sainz-Albon pairing would be pretty mega for a team in their position and where they're trying to go in the near future. There's also still the possibility that when Antonelli turns 18, or even earlier, just because, let's just say, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, after these talks that were supposedly held between the FIA and Formula 1 themselves, has been somewhat more cordial to some of the Formula 1 ideas, shall we say. Probably not trying to break that relationship down any further, and it would probably be a thing that Formula 1 would like if Antonelli was given the exemption before he's 18 to drive earlier, which we believe that Williams have asked for. So that may happen, but it still would be possible on this time frame that Sargent could go mid-season, Antonelli could get a few months to prepare him for the Mercedes seat next year, then Sainz would come in after that. So lots of options, but the feeling is that the Williams offer for Sainz, given the circumstances, is actually the most logical, and if that is what Sainz decides to do, the belief is that they could confirm that as soon as the Spanish Grand Prix, which obviously would be a pretty sensible timeline. The other, and probably the big news though really in the article, was around Alpine and what's going on there, because it's obviously a shambles, right? Like, there's no surprise there, as he says, not because their drivers are colliding as usual, but rather because the Renault CEO, Luca De Meo, did not appear, and he seems to have given up on the idea of trying to fix this troublesome F1 team team that has not achieved what he thought it could, largely down to his own decisions, but, you know, whatever. Apparently, he has been shopping around to secure an engine supplier from 2026, which seems to imply they might be giving up on their own engine project here, right? We know that Renault, Alpine, they keep saying how their engine is behind the curve. They're, 30 horsepower down or whatever they are, apparently, compared to the rest of the field. And it seems like, and even Joe Soward says, this isn't speculation, this has been confirmed by two extremely good sources, that effectively Renault are at least contemplating having another engine supplier in 2026, which would be giving up their own branding or their own engine manufacturing and effectively stepping away from the sport and doing an Alfa Romeo, as he describes, where you effectively title sponsor a team like Sauber and everyone kind of thinks, oh, it's an Alfa Romeo works team, but it's obviously not really. You pay money to achieve that. You use Ferrari engines. And as Soward says, like, this isn't something that Bernie would really have accommodated. But nowadays, Liberty seems to be down if you get the big brands in. So that might be the future for Renault. To shut down its engine operation, either keep building the chassis, partner with somebody else, keep naming it Alpine or Renault, whatever they want to do. And I'm sure that Andretti are seeing these developments with a bit of a smile on their face, thinking, you know what, that might open the door to something in the near future, especially when Flavio Briatore is being lined up for a role here. We talked about these rumours yesterday. Soward mentioned it in his notebook as well, that apparently they were even looking for a pretty senior role here for Briatore, which can surely only end badly. But I guess time will tell on this. It's Alpine, baby. It's always an absolute shambles. Red Bull and Perez apparently are very close to a deal. Some people are saying it's done. Some people are saying it's not quite done yet. Perez doesn't have the leverage to push for anything more than a one-year deal. So that's probably what he's going to get. You can debate the merits of whether they should or shouldn't. I don't think they should personally. But if they do, we'll see if it works out for them. It will if the Red Bull is back to form on regular circuits. But if it's not, and the McLarens and the Ferraris are within a 10th and a half, Perez is going to be 5th, 6th at very best. And that is just straight up not going to be good enough for Red Bull to actually dominate the Constructors' Championship, especially when Yuki Tsunoda has been performing very well. That's the confusing part to me, is it's not like Red Bull don't have an informed driver in their stable they could put into that car. He has as many Q3 appearances this year, Yuki, as Hamilton and Perez do, and he has more Q3 appearances than Alonso and, of course, his teammate Ricciardo. You'd have thought that he'd be in consideration, but for whatever reason, he isn't, and therefore there's been talk about where Yuki is going to go, because, if he's not getting the Red Bull seat now, he never will, effectively. So he might need to look at an alternate option. We've talked about Haas as a potential possibility. I think in the medium term, Yuki to Aston Martin makes a lot of sense because of the Honda connection they'll have from 2026 and beyond. Speaking of those cars, of course, this was the former Aston Martin project with the Racing Point. This is what they are trying to replicate Formula 1 going forwards. F1 is pushing for more distinguishable liveries, so no more carbon effectively. The problem is, how do you regulate this? Because you can ask the teams, hey, can you please be really colourful and, paint the car in your team colours and have a grid looking like this again? And they'll say, oh yeah, sure, we'll do that. But then weight saving is kind of a thing, unfortunately, nowadays. So there's a bit of a back and forth on how they're going to achieve this, but it is definitely a target. In the same way that Stefano Domenicali has been very clear that making the cars louder again is an actual target of Formula 1, they are saying the same thing here about the liveries as well. So that's probably a good thing if they can execute it properly. Couple of things on Red Bull as well, because we saw the damage, of course, for Sergio Perez back in Monaco. $3 million apparently worth of damage, which effectively constituted their entire crash budget for the entire season, which has gone in a split second with the crash with Kevin Magnussen. This is especially bad because of the development time, right? We know that the way that it works nowadays under the cost cap and the development testing regulations, Red Bull as the champions, they have far fewer time than anybody else does, and therefore that combined with fewer resources to spend and fewer wind tunnel times just means that things are becoming seriously complicated for Red Bull right now, and they're on the verge of not being able to bring the upgrade packages that they would like. Things are looking very rosy though for McLaren, because they're talking about the fact that their upgrades have actually exceeded expectations. They struggled in the slower speed corners at the start of the season. They were good on the high speed. It was the same thing last year really, when the McLaren could be competitive with the Red Bull at the higher speed circuits with the fast corners, but the problem was the Red Bull was already also very good there at those circuits as well, so winning was a massive challenge. This year it's possible, as Lando Norris proved back in Miami, and of course Piastri was very close to pole position in Monaco, and actually in terms of if you put together Piastri's fastest sector times during qualifying, he would have had pole position, slightly ahead of Charles Leclerc even. So that McLaren now is good in the slow speed, and I think Andrea Stella from McLaren had said that they were expecting it to be until at least next year, or at least several upgrade packages down the line, where they could actually hope to fix these slower speed weaknesses. But now they're saying, no, we've done it already effectively with the upgrade packages they brought, which surprises even them. And this is what Helmut Marko is saying, that, yeah, you know what, the current regulations are closing up. We're into the third year now. You can see the results of people copying, certainly the McLaren. So, you know, Red Bull are certainly feeling the heat at the moment. The one team they're not feeling the heat from, though, is, of course, Mercedes. They've been off the boil for a long time at this point. They weren't far off pole. I know Monaco's a short lap, you know, minute and 11 seconds, minute and 10 or whatever it was, that got pole position in the end. Russell was 2.5 tenths off. Hamilton was roughly 3 tenths off. Now, interesting Grand Prix, because there was only one new spec front wing available for the Mercedes drivers. Russell got it, Hamilton didn't. And this is when Hamilton, we saw this a couple of days ago now, we mentioned this clip when Hamilton said, you know, we'll see, when asked the question, why do you not expect to beat Russell this year? Which implied some degree of bias or even like sabotage internally. Hamilton was kind of talking about how in, you know, qualifying, the pace is there, and then all of a sudden when it gets to Q3, the pace isn't there anymore. And I think the general perception of people reading this was, you know, maybe Hamilton's just a bit frustrated and searching for answers to why he can't quite match George in quali right now. Of course, this weekend there was an obvious reason, because the new front wing that George had, Hamilton didn't, and the team unanimously said, yeah, the new front wing is better. But there seemed to be more to it than that with what Hamilton said. And certainly after the Grand Prix, we talked about it the other day, the very strange decision making on the radio made people think, was that just a mistake, or was there something more to that with them not telling Hamilton out lap critical? Jamie Chadwick as well, I know this caused a bit of controversy, so I thought I'd mention it, because, you know, Jamie says he's spinning it to make it sound like he's not got the upgrades this weekend, which for me, I'm not sure about. It seemed like Mercedes, they generally bring upgrades to both cars, which is objectively not true. This, I mean, okay, usually maybe true, but objectively in this case is not true, because they literally did have only one version, and, you know, then you'll see, people would, you know how people are, aren't they? So then we see Jamie Chadwick here in an Instagram post or whatever with George Russell, so people are implying, oh, she's in the Russell camp, but that's why she's saying this about Hamilton. And you know, it was very clear that Hamilton still had the old spec version, Russell had the new spec version that, you know, was very clear through the entire weekends. But the other point was on the decision from Bono and the team not to maybe make the call of outlap critical that they should have done, and Hamilton was like, why didn't you tell me that? Because, you know, it wasn't clear whether I needed to push or not. And Hamilton doesn't have all the information, of course, that the team has at the time. Russell, though, actually said that it wasn't a matter of Russell getting the upgrade package before Hamilton just because he's now the number one, because Hamilton's leaving and therefore Russell's the new leader, as it were. So I'm sure Russell expects in many ways to be treated now like the number one. Obviously, when it comes to meetings behind the scenes at Mercedes, Russell is going to get invited to every single one. Hamilton most certainly is not, and I am sure that is already happening. So there are reasons to believe that Russell is getting favoured internally at Mercedes right now. Even for them, it maybe makes some sense, but surely it's about maximising points every weekend, and it doesn't really feel like Mercedes are doing that right now with some of the decisions that they are making. So Russell said actually that we did a coin toss for it, and Lewis didn't want to do that. He tried it in the simulator and was happy for Russell to use it instead because it doesn't go without risk. If we made a mistake in qualifying, they've only got one front wing, then it ruins it. So Russell basically said I was happy to take the risk. So they kind of tossed a coin, they kind of didn't toss a coin, and in the end Russell got it, Hamilton didn't. But, you know, if Hamilton had said, no, I really really want it, George, they probably would have done that instead. So, you know, interesting to think about. We don't have Hamilton's assessment on that situation, only Russell's side of the story. So it's all very interesting, this drama, really, between these two guys. And Toto Wolff says something very interesting, I thought. Look, obviously he's going to say, we're treating our drivers fairly. No team principal isn't going to say that. But he does say that, you know, all drivers are a bit sceptical, and kind of implying that it's fair enough for, you know, Lewis to be sceptical in this case of the way that we've kind of gone about this. I think as a team we have demonstrated, even in the most tense competitions, with the exception of Abu Dhabi 2016, right, when they did try and manage the race a little bit better, that, you know, they're trying to be fair, they're trying to be transparent. I can understand as a driver you want the best out of yourself and the team. Sometimes when it's going against you, you can question it. But as a team, we're 100% on a mission of giving the two drivers the best possible cars and the best possible strategies and support. So pretty interesting, right, that, you know, Toto doesn't just completely shut down Hamilton's concerns. He says, look, I actually know why Lewis thinks that way, but I disagree, type thing, which is pretty interesting to hear, to be honest. And they say, look, we're trying to get the best out of this relationship, maximize the results for the final season, which is fair, but I don't think Hamilton knows more than we do on these type of stories. He obviously is behind the scenes at the meetings, he sees what's going on, and he seems to believe that things at Mercedes are not all what they seem from the outside, whatever Toto Wolff might actually decide to say publicly. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. A couple of quick things to mention before we close out the video here. This is pretty interesting that, well, in the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari are at 252, Red Bull are at 276. It's not far away, and, you know, Verstappen doesn't have a dominant championship lead. If Sainz had raced in Jeddah as well, Perez's grasp on P5 and attempts to climb up the rankings would be looking even worse than it already does. Speaking of Verstappen and Hamilton, Max, by not leading a lap in Monaco, which is kind of crazy sad actually, ended a streak of leading at least one lap in 14 consecutive races. Now, the record here is actually held by Lewis Hamilton, but there's some interesting names on here, really. So you've got Fernando Alonso, and even, you know, Schumacher, Senna, Hamilton and Verstappen had a streak of 12 races in a row where they led a lap of a Grand Prix. Vettel had 2 streaks of 13 races. Verstappen and Hamilton, of course, Verstappen's streak just ended with 14. Schumacher with 15. Jackie Stewart, actually, between the 1968 US Grand Prix and the 1970 Belgian Grand Prix, led at least one lap in every single race. And then Hamilton holds the record at 18 between 2014 Budapest and 2015 Silverstone. But even with that talk on Hamilton and Russell and that type of stuff, that's certainly not the biggest margin between teammates this season. Yes, Russell has had the edge on Hamilton in qualifying so far this year, but it's been so marginal. Whereas for these drivers, bit of a different story, right? Albon on average has qualified about 13th. Sargent has qualified 18.5, which isn't great. Magnussen-Hülkenberg is another big gap. Verstappen-Perez is probably the worst looking one here, actually, because Max is now averaging 1.6 after getting all the poles, but then P6 in Monaco. Perez is averaging P6 the entire year, obviously not helped by the recent P18. Bottas and Zhou, that's another one, right, that, you know, Bottas has been comprehensively outperforming Zhou now for some time, and it's actually been looking really good. The problem is the car's so bad that nobody cares, unfortunately, for Bottas, so I don't really know where he's going to end up next. Maybe he ends up staying at Audi if they don't get signed and he goes to Williams, as we discussed earlier on. And then Yuki on Ricciardo. Quite a sizable gap there as well. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.